Get away from me, you animals! Richard Blackstone's terrified screams echoed through Le Bernardin as four masked men pinned him against the marble floor. Blood streamed from his split lip as the leader pressed a knife to his throat. 10 million cash, or we carve you up piece by piece. The other diners cowered behind overturned tables. Security cameras captured everything. A billionaire about to die while New York's elite watched helplessly. Then Sarah Johnson stepped forward. The same black woman Richard had humiliated just minutes earlier. The cleanup girl he'd forced to kneel and called worthless. The maid whose wrist still bore his fingerprints. She moved like lightning itself. 30 seconds later, all four attackers lay unconscious. Richard stared up at his savior in complete shock, finally understanding the deadly mistake he'd made. The woman he'd treated like garbage had just saved his life. Le Bernardin wasn't just a restaurant, it was a cathedral of power, where senators whispered deals over $300 steaks and tech moguls decided the fate of nations between courses. The kind of place where your net worth determined how quickly waiters appeared. Sarah Johnson had worked these hallowed halls for 3 years, invisible to the titans who shaped America's economy. At 35, she moved through the dining room like a ghost, refilling glasses, clearing plates, enduring the casual cruelty that came with serving Manhattan's untouchables. Every morning at 5 a.m., Sarah's alarm pierced the silence of her cramped Brooklyn apartment. She'd slip out quietly, careful not to wake her sleeping daughter Emma, and catch the first subway into the city. By 6:30, she was in Le Bernardin's basement, changing into the crisp black uniform that made her disappear. What the restaurant's elite clientele never suspected was the military precision behind Sarah's movements. The way she scanned every entrance when entering a room. How her eyes tracked exit routes automatically. The controlled breathing that kept her calm when entitled billionaires screamed inches from her face. 10 years earlier, Sarah had been Staff Sergeant Johnson, personal protection specialist for high-value targets in hostile territories. She'd guarded ambassadors in Baghdad, CEOs in Kabul, politicians in places where bodyguards died protecting their charges. Her hands had disarmed suicide bombers and neutralized kidnapping attempts. But a roadside IED had shattered her left leg and ended her military career. The medical discharge came with a Purple Heart and a pension that barely covered rent in New York City, where she'd moved for Emma's specialized medical care. Now those same hands that once held sniper rifles carried serving trays. The tactical awareness that had kept diplomats alive was reduced to remembering wine preferences and avoiding wandering hands. Richard Blackstone represented everything Sarah had once protected and now served. At 52, the tech mogul had built his empire on government contracts and military technology, growing wealthy from wars Sarah had fought in. His well-tech industries supplied surveillance equipment to armies worldwide, while Richard dined safely in Manhattan penthouses. 6 feet tall, with silver hair that cost more to maintain than Sarah earned in a month, Richard moved through Le Bernardin like he owned it, which he practically did, being the restaurant group's largest private investor. He treated staff like sophisticated appliances, expecting perfection while offering contempt. Richard's evening ritual never varied. Table 12, facing the kitchen so he could critique service, Dom Perignon 2010, medium rare Wagyu, and a steady stream of humiliation directed at whoever served him. He particularly enjoyed targeting Sarah, something about her quiet dignity that offended his worldview. Tonight felt different, though. Sarah noticed the tension in Richard's shoulders, the way he kept checking his phone, the nervous energy radiating from his usual table. 3 times he'd already snapped at servers over imaginary mistakes. The restaurant buzzed with its typical Thursday evening crowd. Senator Morrison discussing defense budgets at table 6. Real estate magnate Brooks closing $1 billion Manhattan deal at table 15. The usual collection of titans who believed their wealth made them untouchable. None of them paid attention to the 4 men who'd entered separately over the past hour. Men who moved with predatory purpose, their eyes constantly scanning, hands resting near concealed weapons. Men who knew exactly why they were here. Sarah noticed them immediately. Her training kicked in automatically. Threat assessment, positioning, probable weapons count. She recognized the tactical formation, the way they'd positioned themselves to control all exits. Something was about to happen. Richard continued his usual performance, snapping fingers at servers and making degrading comments about their intelligence. He had no idea that death was circling his table, or that his salvation sat in the hands of the woman he'd spent 3 years tormenting. The 4 men began moving closer to table 12. Sarah's pulse remained steady as steel. The first sign of trouble came at 9:47 p.m. when the lights flickered. Richard barely looked up from his phone, too busy posting another social media rant about entitled workers demanding respect they haven't earned. Sarah saw the coordinated movement immediately. 4 men rising from different tables, hands sliding inside jackets. The tactical precision screamed military training, but not the good kind. "Everyone stay calm and nobody gets hurt." The leader's voice cut through the restaurant's refined chatter. He was massive, easily 6'4", with prison tattoos creeping up his neck. The Glock in his hand looked almost small against his massive frame. Screams erupted from the dining room. Chairs crashed as patrons dove for cover. Senator Morrison's bodyguard reached for his weapon but froze when 2 more guns swung toward him. "Hands where we can see them, hero," snarled the second attacker, a wiry man with dead eyes. "This ain't about you." Richard's face went ghost white as the 4 men surrounded his table. His phone clattered to the floor, live stream still running to his 50,000 followers. "Richard Blackstone," the leader smiled, revealing gold teeth. "You've been a very bad boy. Screwing over the wrong people tends to have consequences." "I don't know what you're talking about," Richard's voice cracked. "I'm just having dinner." The leader's backhand sent Richard sprawling across the marble floor. "You stole from the Kozlov family. 200 million in cryptocurrency that wasn't yours to take." Blood trickled from Richard's split lip as he crawled backward. "That was a legitimate business transaction. I have contracts. The Kozlovs don't care about your contracts." The wiry man pulled out a serrated knife, testing its edge against his thumb. "They want their money back, with interest." Sarah continued clearing tables 30 feet away, moving with deliberate calm while chaos erupted around her. Her trained eyes cataloged everything: weapons count, positioning, probable escape routes. The attackers were focused entirely on Richard, treating everyone else as collateral. "Please," Richard whimpered, "I can transfer the money right now. Just tell me where—" The leader kicked him in the ribs. "Too late for easy solutions, rich boy. We're taking you somewhere private, somewhere we can work on your memory." The knife moved closer to Richard's throat as Sarah made her decision. What happened next would haunt Richard's nightmares for years to come. Not the violence, but the complete powerlessness of watching his carefully constructed world crumble in real time. The leader, who called himself Dmitri, wasn't in any rush. He seemed to savor Richard's terror, feeding off the billionaire's desperate attempts to negotiate his way out of certain death. "You know what I love about rich boys like you?" Dmitri crouched down, pressing the gun barrel against Richard's temple. "You think money solves everything, that your little plastic cards are magic wands." Richard's hands shook as he pulled out his wallet. "I have platinum cards, unlimited credit. Take whatever you want." Dmitri laughed, a sound like grinding glass. "What I want is to watch you crawl." He grabbed Richard's expensive silk tie, using it to drag the billionaire across the marble floor like a dog on a leash. The other diners watched in horrified silence, phones recording everything but nobody daring to intervene. Senator Morrison's bodyguard remained frozen, outnumbered, and outgunned. "Strip!" commanded the wiry man with the knife. "Everything! Let's see what a $200 million man looks like naked." "Please, not here, not in front of—" Richard's voice broke as his eyes found the phones recording everything. His social media empire, built on projecting strength and superiority, was about to become his ultimate humiliation. The knife traced a line down Richard's chest, slicing through his $5,000 Armani shirt. "I said strip, unless you'd prefer I do it for you." With trembling hands, Richard began removing his clothes. The Rolex that cost more than most people's cars. The Italian leather shoes are handcrafted in Milan. The confidence he'd worn like armor for 52 years. Soon he knelt on the cold marble in only his underwear, shivering from fear and shame. The cameras captured every moment. "Look at your king now," Dmitri announced to the restaurant. "This is what $200 million buys you, the right to die slow." From Richard's perspective, the world had become a nightmare movie where he was both a victim and an unwilling star. Every phone in the restaurant was pointed at him. His live stream, still running, showed his terror to thousands of followers who tuned in expecting his usual arrogant rants. The comments were already pouring in. Finally getting what he deserves. Karma is real. Where's your tough talk now, rich boy? But what terrified Richard most wasn't the physical pain. It was the complete destruction of his image, the carefully cultivated persona of untouchable success, reduced to a whimpering man begging for mercy in his underwear. "Stand up," ordered the third attacker, a mountain of muscle with scarred knuckles. "Time for a lesson in respect." Richard struggled to his feet, legs shaking. The man's fist crashed into his stomach, doubling him over. Then an uppercut snapped his head back, blood spraying from his nose across the white tablecloth. "That's for thinking you're better than people," the man growled. Another punch. "That's for stealing from families." Another. "That's for being a piece of shit human being." Richard collapsed, curling into a ball as boots kicked his ribs. Each impact sent shockwaves of agony through his pampered body. He'd never been hit in his life, had paid people to ensure violence never touched his perfect world. "Stop, please," he sobbed. "I'll give you anything, everything I own." Dmitri knelt beside him, voice almost gentle. "See, that's where you're wrong. We're not here for your money. We're here for justice. The families you destroyed, the lives you ruined, they want you to suffer." The fourth man, silent until now, spoke with a thick Russian accent. "Boss wants him alive but broken. Make an example for others who think they can steal from us." They hauled Richard to his feet, supporting his weight between them. His face was a mask of blood and swelling, barely recognizable as the arrogant tech mogul who'd entered the restaurant 2 hours earlier. "Time to go somewhere private," Dmitri smiled. "Somewhere we can really get creative." The restaurant staff cowered behind overturned tables, too terrified to move. The attackers had made it clear anyone who interfered would join Richard in whatever hell awaited him. "My car's out back," the Russian said. "Trunk's already lined with plastic." Richard's bowels nearly released those words. He'd seen enough movies to know what plastic lining meant. This wasn't just kidnapping. It was execution with extra steps. "Wait," he gasped, playing his final card. "The money, it's not just sitting in accounts. There are passwords, security protocols. Kill me and you get nothing." Dmitri paused, considering. "You've got 12 hours to transfer everything, every penny plus interest. If we don't see 250 million in our accounts by sunrise..." He let the threat hang in the air. 12 hours, Richard whispered, blood dripping from his chin. "I can do that, just please don't..." "Shut up!" Dmitri's gun pressed harder against his skull. "Move!" They began dragging him toward the back exit, Richard's bare feet slipping on the marble. His empire, his reputation, his life, all crumbling in real time while Manhattan's elite watched and recorded. What none of them noticed was Sarah Johnson, still methodically clearing tables 30 feet away, moving with the same calm precision she'd shown for 3 years. The same woman Richard had degraded and humiliated countless times. The woman whose steady hands had once protected people just like him. The woman who was about to make a choice that would change everything. As the attackers reached the kitchen doors, Sarah set down her serving tray and began walking toward them. Sarah's mind shifted into combat mode as she watched the 4 men drag Richard toward the kitchen exit. Her military training kicked in automatically. Threat assessment, tactical analysis, probability calculations running at lightning speed. 4 armed men, primary weapons, handguns, 1 knife, formation, loose, overconfident. They'd positioned themselves to control the dining room but left their rear flank exposed. Classic mistake of criminals who relied on fear instead of proper tactics. The leader, Dmitri, was the primary threat. Experienced, disciplined, likely ex-military himself. The knife-wielding second was unpredictable, dangerous in close quarters. The muscle was slow but powerful. The Russian seemed to be calling shots, making him the real decision-maker. Richard's condition, beaten but mobile, maybe 15 minutes before shock set in completely. The attackers were taking him somewhere isolated, which meant this was her only window. Sarah's hands moved to her apron strings, loosening them for maximum mobility. Her shoes, practical flats with good grip, would work. The serving tray in her hands became a shield. 3 years of hiding her true capabilities were about to end. She thought of Emma, sleeping safely in Brooklyn. Her daughter would understand why Mommy had to help the mean man who'd been cruel to her, because that's what heroes do. The kitchen doors swung open. Sarah took a deep breath and stepped forward. Time to remind these men what a real soldier looked like. What happened next would be replayed millions of times across every social media platform, dissected frame by frame, and studied in self-defense classes worldwide. But for Sarah Johnson, it was just another day at the office, except this office happened to be a war zone. "Excuse me, gentlemen." Sarah's voice cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. The 4 attackers froze, turning to see the black maid they'd completely ignored standing 20 feet away. Her hands were empty except for a white serving napkin. Dimitri laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the marble walls. "Lady, unless you're here to clean up the blood, I suggest you go hide with the other sheep." "Actually," Sarah said, taking one measured step forward, "I'm here about Mr. Blackstone. See, he might be a terrible human being, but he's still a human being, and I don't let people get murdered on my watch." The wiry man with the knife sneered. "Your watch? You're a fucking maid. Get lost before you join him." Richard, still bleeding and half-naked, stared at Sarah in disbelief. The woman he'd humiliated countless times was walking directly into certain death. For him. "Sarah, don't. Please. Just run." "Can't do that, Mr. Blackstone." Sarah's voice remained calm, conversational. "My daughter taught me that standing up to bullies is always the right choice, even when the bully is someone you don't particularly like." Dimitri raised his gun, pointing it directly at Sarah's chest. "Last warning, hero. Walk away or die." Sarah tilted her head, studying him with the detached interest of a scientist examining a lab rat. "You know what I learned in 3 tours protecting diplomats? Men who lead with threats are usually the weakest ones in the room." That's when she moved. Sarah's body exploded into motion with a speed that defied physics. The serving napkin she'd been holding flew directly into Dimitri's eyes, momentarily blinding him. In the same instant, she dove forward, rolling under his wild gunshot and coming up inside his guard. Her elbow struck his wrist with surgical precision, sending the gun spinning across the floor. Before he could react, her palm drove upward into his nose, the sharp crack of breaking cartilage echoing through the restaurant. Dimitri staggered backward, blood streaming down his face, but Sarah was already moving to the next target. The knife wielder lunged at her with a vicious overhand strike that would have gutted an ordinary person. Sarah sidestepped like a dancer, caught his wrist, and twisted with mechanical efficiency. The sound of his arm breaking was audible even over the screaming diners. The knife clattered to the floor as the man dropped to his knees, cradling his shattered arm and howling. 8 seconds had passed. The muscle-bound third attacker charged like an enraged bull, relying on size and strength to overwhelm her. Sarah met his charge head-on, dropped low at the last second, and swept his legs. Physics did the rest. 300 pounds of criminals crashed face-first into the marble with enough force to crack the floor. 12 seconds. The Russian, the smart one, had been reaching for his backup weapon. Sarah's foot caught him in the solar plexus, doubling him over. Her knee met his descending face with a sound like a baseball bat hitting a watermelon. He crumpled without a sound. 15 seconds total. 4 armed men were neutralized. Sarah stood in the center of the carnage, not even breathing hard. The restaurant had gone completely silent except for the groans of the defeated attackers. Every phone in the room was recording, capturing the impossible scene of a middle-aged black woman in a maid's uniform standing over 4 unconscious criminals like some kind of avenging angel. Richard stared at her in absolute shock, his mind unable to process what he'd just witnessed. "Sarah, how did you... What are you..." Sarah walked over to where Dimitri lay unconscious, retrieved his gun with practiced ease, and checked the safety before setting it carefully on a nearby table. "Former Staff Sergeant Sarah Johnson, 82nd Airborne, Personal Protection Specialist. 3 tours, 2 Purple Hearts, and apparently 1 really bad judgment call about who deserves saving." She grabbed a tablecloth and wrapped it around Richard's shoulders, covering his nakedness with the same matter-of-fact efficiency she'd shown in combat. "You might want to put some ice on that face, Mr. Blackstone, and maybe consider being nicer to the help." The first phone video was already uploaded to TikTok. Within minutes, Maid Warrior was trending. The caption on the first viral post read, "Holy shit, the restaurant maid just destroyed 4 armed men in 15 seconds to save the asshole boss who treats her like garbage." Senator Morrison's bodyguard, a former Navy SEAL, approached cautiously. "Ma'am, that was beautiful work. Where'd you train?" "Fort Bragg, mostly. Some private contracts overseas." Sarah was already moving around the room, checking on terrified diners, making sure no one was seriously injured. Back to being invisible, as if she hadn't just performed a miracle. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Richard sat on the floor, still clutching the tablecloth, watching Sarah tend to others while his own security team finally arrived, 20 minutes too late to matter. His phone, still live streaming, had captured everything. The comments were exploding. Did that just really happen? Maid just became the most badass person alive? Richard Blackstone owes his life to someone he probably pays minimum wage. Justice served by the server. Detective Maria Rodriguez was first through the door, weapon drawn, expecting to find a massacre. Instead, she found 4 zip-tied criminals. Sarah had improvised restraints from kitchen towels, one grateful billionaire, and dozens of witnesses eager to testify about the most incredible thing they'd ever seen. "Ma'am," Detective Rodriguez approached Sarah carefully. "I'm going to need a statement." Sarah was wiping down tables again as if nothing had happened. "Of course, Detective, though I should mention I need to be home by midnight. My daughter has school tomorrow." The video footage would be analyzed by experts worldwide. Military instructors would use it as a teaching tool. The 15-second sequence would become legendary in self-defense circles. But for Sarah Johnson, it was just Thursday night. The only question remaining was what would happen when the real world discovered that their new hero had been hiding in plain sight all along. The morning after the rescue, Sarah's life exploded into a nightmare she never saw coming. By 6 a.m., her phone was buzzing nonstop. News vans lined her quiet Brooklyn street. Reporters shouted questions through her apartment window while Emma got ready for school, terrified by the chaos outside. "Mommy, why are all those people here?" Emma's voice trembled as she peeked through the curtains at the media circus below. "It's okay, baby. Mommy just helped someone last night, and people want to talk about it." Sarah kept her voice calm while her mind raced. This attention was exactly what she'd spent 3 years avoiding. The viral video had exploded overnight. Maid Warrior dominated every platform. The 15-second clip had been viewed 20 million times, spawning countless reaction videos, memes, and think pieces about hidden heroes among us. But by noon, the narrative began shifting in ways Sarah hadn't anticipated. Richard Blackstone's legal team struck first. His lawyer, the notorious Marcus Webb, called a press conference outside Le Bernardin, cameras rolling as he painted a very different picture of the previous night's events. "My client, Mr. Blackstone, while grateful to be alive, has serious concerns about the excessive force used by Miss Johnson," Webb announced, his voice dripping with practiced sympathy. 4 men lie in the hospital with severe injuries. One may never walk again. We must ask ourselves, was this level of violence truly necessary? The questions came like machine gun fire. Wasn't there a less violent solution? Should civilians with military training be allowed to use such force? Does this set a dangerous precedent? Sarah watched the press conference from her living room, Emma beside her eating cereal before school. Her daughter's eyes grew wide as the lawyer continued his attack. "While we appreciate Miss Johnson's intentions, vigilante justice cannot be tolerated in a civilized society. These men, regardless of their alleged crimes, had rights. Rights that were violated by someone who took the law into her own hands." The news anchors picked up the narrative immediately. By afternoon, the story had completely flipped. Sarah went from hero to controversial figure in less than 12 hours. Was the restaurant rescue too violent? Read the CNN Chiron. Fox News ran segments questioning whether military-trained service workers posed a public safety risk. MSNBC debated the racial implications of celebrating violence, even in self-defense. Social media turned vicious with stunning speed. The same platforms that had celebrated Maid Warrior now questioned everything. She could have just called 911 instead of playing Rambo. 4 broken bones for what? Saving some rich asshole? This is what happens when you give weapons training to civilians. Pretty convenient that the black woman just happened to be a trained killer. Sarah's phone rang constantly. Job offers mixed with death threats. Movie producers competed with angry activists demanding she be prosecuted. Her story became a Rorschach test for everyone's political beliefs. The worst part was watching Emma absorb the hatred. Her daughter came home from school in tears after classmates asked if her mom was a bad guy now. Mrs. Peterson said violence is never the answer, Emma sobbed. Did you do something wrong, Mommy? Sarah held her daughter close, feeling the weight of impossible choices. Sometimes, baby, grown-ups have to make hard decisions to protect people, even when other grown-ups don't understand. But the real blow came Thursday morning, exactly 1 week after the rescue. Sarah arrived at Le Bernardin for her regular shift to find Manager Brooks waiting with papers and a security guard. Sarah, I'm sorry. The restaurant group has decided to terminate your employment, effective immediately. The words hit like a physical blow. Terminate? Why? Chen couldn't meet her eyes. The situation has created too much controversy. Protesters outside, media attention, customers canceling reservations. The board feels it's best for everyone if you move on. Sarah stared at the termination papers. 3 years of steady employment vanishing because she'd saved a man's life. This is about Richard, isn't it? He wants me gone. Mr. Blackstone had nothing to do with this decision. Brooks lied badly. This comes from corporate. But Sarah knew better. Richard couldn't handle being saved by someone he'd spent years humiliating. His ego couldn't survive owing his life to the cleanup girl he'd treated like furniture. That afternoon, the legal attacks escalated. The 4 criminals, all now conscious and lawyered up, filed a massive civil lawsuit against Sarah. $50 million in damages for excessive force, assault with intent to maim, and violation of civil rights. Their lawyer, a publicity-hungry activist named David Sterling, held his own press conference. Miss Johnson used military-grade combat techniques against men who posed no immediate threat to her personally, Sterling declared. She inserted herself into a situation that should have been handled by trained professionals. Her vigilante actions resulted in permanent disabilities for my clients. The questions that followed made Sarah's blood boil. Weren't the attackers just trying to collect a legitimate debt? Did racism play a role in Miss Johnson's decision to use excessive force? Should former military personnel be required to register their combat training? Richard himself remained conspicuously silent through all of this, hiding behind lawyers and PR firms while Sarah's life crumbled. The man whose life she'd saved was letting her burn to protect his own reputation. The psychological warfare was devastatingly effective. Sarah found herself questioning everything. Had she used too much force? Could she have handled it differently? Were 4 broken criminals really worth destroying her daughter's stability? Emma started having nightmares, waking up screaming about bad men coming to hurt Mommy. The media attention made normal life impossible. Grocery shopping became a gauntlet of cameras and hostile questions. By Friday, Sarah was trapped in her apartment, unemployed, facing financial ruin, and watching her daughter suffer for her choices. The hero narrative had become a cautionary tale about the dangers of taking justice into your own hands. The cruel irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent 3 years enduring Richard's daily humiliations to keep this job. Now, saving his life had cost her everything. Her phone buzzed with another death threat, this one more specific than the others. Someone had found her address, posted photos of Emma's school online, made detailed plans about what they'd do to the violent bitch and her spawn. Sarah stared at the message, feeling the walls closing in. The same hands that had saved Richard Blackstone were now shaking with helpless rage. Outside, reporters waited like vultures, ready to capture her next moment of weakness for the evening news cycle. The woman who'd faced down terrorists in 3 different countries had never felt more powerless in her life. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning when Sarah opened her laptop to find her daughter's school photo plastered across a hate website with the caption, "Violent Mama, Violence Baby, Apple Doesn't Fall Far." Emma was eating breakfast, humming softly while drawing pictures of superheroes. She had no idea that strangers on the internet were calling for her death because her mother had saved a man's life. Sarah's hands trembled as she closed the laptop. 3 weeks of systematic character assassination had pushed her to the edge. Job rejections, legal threats, media manipulation, all orchestrated by people who'd never faced a real threat in their comfortable lives. Her phone buzzed. Another interview request, this one from Rebecca Martinez at Channel 7. But something in the message felt different, respectful, professional, not the usual vulture journalism she'd endured. Miss Johnson, I've been investigating the legal attacks against you. I believe there's more to this story. Would you be willing to speak on camera? Your choice of location, your terms. Sarah stared at the message for a long moment. She'd avoided interviews, letting others control her narrative. Maybe it was time to fight back. 3 hours later, Rebecca Martinez sat across from Sarah in her small living room. The reporter was younger than expected, with intelligent eyes and a genuine manner that put Sarah slightly at ease. The official story is that you used excessive force against men who were simply trying to collect a debt, Rebecca began. But I've been digging into the background of these so-called victims. What I found is interesting. Rebecca pulled out a thick folder. Dmitry Volkov, the leader. He's wanted in connection with 3 murders in Brighton Beach. The knife wielder, Tommy Reeds, has a rap sheet including armed robbery and assault with a deadly weapon. These aren't debt collectors, Sarah. They're killers. Sarah's breath caught. The news reports said they were legitimate businessmen. The news reports were based entirely on information provided by their lawyer, David Sterling, who, it turns out, has interesting connections to some very wealthy people who benefit from your public destruction. Rebecca spread photos across the coffee table, bank records, phone logs, meeting schedules. Sterling's law firm received a $2 million retainer last month. Guess who paid it? Sarah's blood turned to ice as she saw the name on the transfer documents. Blackstone Holdings, LLC. Richard paid them? To destroy me? It gets better. Rebecca's voice carried the excitement of a journalist uncovering real corruption. I spoke to Detective Rodriguez, who investigated the scene. Want to know what she told me off the record? The camera rolled as Rebecca continued. The 4 men weren't just armed with guns and knives. They had zip ties, plastic sheeting, and bolt cutters in their vehicle. This wasn't debt collection. It was a planned torture and murder operation. Sarah felt the pieces clicking together. So when Richard's lawyers claim I used excessive force, you saved his life against men who were planning to cut him into pieces and dump his body in the Hudson River. Rebecca leaned forward. Which raises an interesting question. Why is Richard Blackstone paying millions to destroy the woman who saved him from a horrific death? The interview aired that evening during prime time, but by then, Sarah had already set larger wheels in motion. She'd made some calls to old military contacts, people who understood that sometimes the truth needed backup to survive in a world full of lies. The next morning, Richard Blackstone agreed to his first live television interview since the incident. He appeared on Good Morning America, confident that his PR team had crafted the perfect narrative to finally bury Sarah Johnson once and for all. Host Jennifer Adams smiled warmly as Richard settled into the plush studio chair, makeup covering most of his fading bruises. Mr. Blackstone, you've been relatively quiet since the incident at Le Bernardin. How are you feeling about Miss Johnson's actions? Richard had rehearsed this answer for days. Jennifer, I'm grateful to be alive, truly, but I think we need to have a serious conversation about appropriate responses to conflict. What happened that night was traumatic for everyone involved. You mean traumatic for the 4 men who are now in wheelchairs and feeding tubes? Richard nodded gravely. Exactly. Violence should always be a last resort. I can't help but wonder if there were other options that might have saved everyone from permanent harm. Options like what, Mr. Blackstone? Well, negotiation, de-escalation. These men claimed I owed them money. Perhaps we could have worked something out without anyone getting hurt. Jennifer nodded sympathetically. So you believe Miss Johnson overreacted? I think she meant well, but her military background made her respond disproportionate to the actual threat. That's when Jennifer's expression shifted slightly. That's interesting, Mr. Blackstone, because I have some additional information about that night that might change your perspective. Richard's media-trained smile flickered. Oh? Jennifer turned to face the camera directly. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're about to see is security footage from outside Le Bernardin, taken 20 minutes before the incident inside. I should warn viewers that this content is disturbing. The video played on screens across America. 4 men loaded plastic sheeting, power tools, and what appeared to be body bags into a van parked behind the restaurant. Audio captured their conversation clearly. "The boss wants him to suffer before we dump the pieces. How long do we keep him alive? Long enough to transfer everything, then we get creative." Richard's face went white as he watched his own planned torture being discussed in casual detail. "Mr. Blackstone," Jennifer continued, "does this footage change your opinion about whether Miss Johnson used excessive force?" Richard's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. His carefully crafted narrative crumbled in real time on national television. I didn't know. They said they just wanted money." "Actually, you did know." Jennifer produced another document. "This is a police report filed by your own security team 3 days before the incident. It details credible threats against your life and recommends increased protection. You chose to ignore those recommendations." The final blow came when Jennifer revealed the payment to Sterling's law firm. "Mr. Blackstone, can you explain why you've spent $2 million trying to destroy the reputation of the woman who saved your life from torture and murder?" Richard's composure completely shattered. "That's not... I never meant... My lawyers said..." "Your lawyers said what, exactly?" "They said if she became too much of a hero, it would make me look weak, that the story needed to be controlled." The words tumbled out before Richard could stop them. "I built my reputation on being strong, untouchable. Having a black maid saves me from..." He stopped, realizing what he'd just admitted on live television. "From what, Mr. Blackstone?" From people I should have been able to handle myself." The silence that followed lasted exactly 7 seconds. 7 seconds that destroyed Richard Blackstone's reputation more thoroughly than any physical violence ever could. Social media exploded within minutes. #RichardIsACoward trended worldwide. The man who'd spent millions trying to destroy Sarah's reputation had just confessed to orchestrating it all because his ego couldn't handle being saved by someone he considered beneath him. By noon, Richard's board of directors had called an emergency meeting to discuss his removal as CEO. The avalanche that buried Richard Blackstone's empire began within hours of his disastrous television confession and didn't stop for weeks. By 2 p.m. that same day, Welltech Industries stock had crashed 40%. The board of directors issued a terse statement. "Mr. Blackstone has been placed on indefinite administrative leave pending a full investigation into his recent actions and statements." But the real destruction came from an unexpected source: his own employees. Sarah's phone rang at 3:17 p.m. The caller ID showed Welltech Industries. "Miss Johnson, this is Patricia Williams. I'm Richard's former executive assistant. I wanted you to know that the entire staff watched his interview. We've been talking and, well, we think you should see some things." What Patricia and 12 other Welltech employees revealed over the next 48 hours painted a picture of systematic workplace abuse that made Richard's treatment of Sarah look mild by comparison. Email threads where Richard called black employees diversity hires who should know their place. Security footage of him screaming at janitors and cafeteria workers, recorded phone calls where he bragged about keeping the help scared to maintain productivity. The employees had documented everything, waiting for the right moment to act. Richard's public meltdown had given them that moment. Within a week, 27 current and former employees filed a class action lawsuit for workplace harassment and discrimination. The Department of Justice opened a federal investigation into Welltech's hiring and promotion practices. Major government contracts worth hundreds of millions were suspended pending review. Richard's carefully constructed empire crumbled like a house of cards. Meanwhile, Sarah's life transformed in ways she'd never imagined possible. The first call came from Marcus Brooks, Le Bernardin's manager who'd fired her. His voice shook with embarrassment as he offered her job back, at triple her previous salary, with full benefits and a formal apology. Sarah politely declined. She had bigger plans now. The vindication came during a packed press conference at the Brooklyn Community Center. Sarah stood behind a podium, Emma beside her, facing cameras from every major network. "3 weeks ago, I was just a restaurant worker trying to support my daughter," Sarah began, her voice steady and strong. "Tonight, I'm announcing the launch of the Guardian Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to teaching practical self-defense skills to service workers across America. The crowd erupted in applause, but Sarah wasn't finished. We're starting with a $10 million grant. She paused, letting the number sink in. Donated anonymously by someone who understands the importance of protecting those who serve others. What Sarah didn't mention was that the anonymous donor was Richard himself, or rather his desperate attempt to salvage some shred of public goodwill through his lawyers. His $2 million attack fund had been redirected as part of a settlement agreement that kept him out of federal prison. The foundation's first training facility opened in the basement of the same Brooklyn Community Center, where Sarah had once taught Emma to throw a proper punch. Within a month, they had classes running 18 hours a day, teaching restaurant workers, hotel staff, retail employees, and home health aides how to recognize threats and protect themselves. The training wasn't about creating vigilantes, it was about confidence, awareness, and knowing when to fight versus when to run. Sarah made sure every student understood the difference. 6 months later, Richard Blackstone's fall was complete. Welltech Industries had been sold to competitors for parts. His Manhattan penthouse was seized to pay legal settlements. His social media empire, once boasting 50,000 followers, now consisted of a handful of Russian bots and conspiracy theorists. He'd been spotted working as a night security guard at a strip mall in Newark, the ultimate irony for a man who'd built his fortune on believing that money determined human worth. Sarah, meanwhile, had become something she'd never sought but somehow deserved, a genuine hero whose story inspired millions. The Guardian Foundation expanded to 40 cities within a year. Sarah's book, Standing Guard, A Server's Guide to Safety, became a bestseller. Universities invited her to speak about workplace dignity and the hidden strength in everyday heroes. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came on a Tuesday evening when Sarah returned to Le Bernardin, not as an employee, but as an honored guest, celebrating the Foundation's first anniversary. She sat at table 12, the same spot where Richard had humiliated her countless times. The staff, many of whom she'd trained in self-defense, served her with pride and respect. As Sarah raised her glass of champagne, the good stuff, not the cheap wine Richard used to complain about, she thought about the strange journey that had brought her here. Sometimes the people who try to break you end up making you stronger than you ever imagined possible. 2 years after that night at Le Bernardin, Sarah Johnson stood on the stage of Madison Square Garden, looking out at 20,000 faces gathered for the first annual Guardian Foundation Summit. Service workers from across America had traveled here at their own expense. Waitresses from Alabama, hotel housekeepers from Nevada, retail workers from Oregon, all united by a simple belief that dignity shouldn't depend on your job title. When I was mopping up wine that Richard Blackstone deliberately spilled on my uniform, Sarah spoke into the microphone, her voice carrying to every corner of the arena, I never imagined that humiliation would lead to this moment. Sometimes our worst experiences become the foundation for our greatest triumphs. The crowd erupted in sustained applause, but Sarah's favorite sound was Emma's voice shouting, "That's my mama!" from the front row. Her daughter, now 12 and healthy as ever, had become the Foundation's unofficial mascot and fiercest advocate for anti-bullying programs in schools. The statistics Sarah shared painted an incredible picture of transformation. The Guardian Foundation now operated in 150 cities across 47 states. Over 200,000 service workers had completed their training programs. Workplace harassment incidents in participating businesses had dropped by 67%. More importantly, worker confidence and job satisfaction had increased dramatically. We've proven something that bullies like Richard Blackstone never understood, Sarah continued. Strength isn't about tearing others down, it's about lifting each other up. The audience included some unexpected faces. Detective Rodriguez, now heading the NYPD's Workplace Violence Prevention Unit, sat beside Rebecca Martinez, whose investigative series on Sarah's story had won a Pulitzer Prize. Even manager Brooks from Le Bernardin was there, his restaurant now a flagship location for the Foundation's corporate partnership program. But perhaps the most surprising presence was Patricia Williams, Richard's former assistant, who'd become the Foundation's East Coast coordinator. Her testimony about workplace abuse had been the final nail in Richard's corporate coffin, but tonight she spoke about redemption and second chances. Sarah taught us that heroism isn't about being perfect, Patricia addressed the crowd during her segment. It's about doing the right thing, even when it costs you everything. The real magic happened during the breakout sessions, where experienced service workers shared strategies with newcomers. A veteran server from Chicago demonstrated de-escalation techniques to hotel workers from Detroit. Home health aides from rural Kentucky learned situational awareness from former security professionals now working retail. Sarah watched it all with quiet satisfaction, remembering the lonely nights when she'd wondered if saving Richard had been worth the price. The answer surrounded her now. Thousands of people empowered to stand up for themselves and others. The summit's closing ceremony featured a video montage of foundation graduates sharing their stories. A bartender in Phoenix who'd used her training to stop a robbery. A hotel housekeeper in Miami who'd helped police identify human trafficking victims. A restaurant manager in Portland who'd completely transformed his workplace culture using foundation principles. As the evening wound down, Sarah made one final announcement that brought the crowd to its feet. Next month, we're launching Guardian Global, expanding our programs to service workers in 12 countries. Because dignity has no borders and every worker deserves to feel safe and respected. The celebration continued late into the night, but Sarah slipped away early to tuck Emma into bed at their new home in Queens. A modest place, comfortable but not ostentatious, reflecting Sarah's unchanged values despite her newfound success. "Mama," Emma said sleepily, "do you think Mr. Richard learned his lesson?" Sarah smiled, thinking of the last report she'd received about her former tormentor. Richard was now managing a small diner in Trenton, reportedly treating his employees with unexpected kindness. Some people said it was just an act, but Sarah chose to believe in the possibility of genuine change. "I think everyone deserves a chance to become better, baby, even the people who hurt us." If Sarah's story inspired you, don't just watch act. Visit guardianfoundation.org to find training programs in your area. Share this video with anyone who's ever felt powerless at work. Remember, you don't need a military background to stand up for what's right. You just need courage. Hit subscribe to Black Soul Stories for more stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And next time you see a service worker being mistreated, ask yourself, what would Sarah do? Together we can build a world where everyone's job comes with dignity included. #Guardian Strong, #Stand Together, #Service Workers Matter.